Hello everyone. Today's video is another viewer's request, and if there are any videos that you want me to cover, let me know down below and I will look into them. Now, I'm not sure if you've noticed that I've been posting less frequently, but the videos I'm posting are longer form. I said in the comment section when I asked if y'all wanted to see some longer, more deep dive videos, and there were quite a few people that said they were interested in that, so I've been trying to do some of those, but that does mean I'm going to be posting less videos than if I'm doing longer deep dive videos that are, nearing an hour. And I just want some extra feedback from all of you. If you prefer like once a week me posting a deep dive or a longer form video, let me know if you'd rather have that, or if you want me to post 2 or 3, shorter videos throughout the week. But when we're talking about cases like today's video on Brittanee Drexel, it's definitely a case that took me a long time to research. There was a lot of information to go through, and then it's also going to take me a long time to film and then edit. And content creation is not my full-time job right now, so unfortunately I can't dedicate all my time to this. But if you want to give this video a thumbs up and hit that follow button, it's a free way to support, and hopefully in the future I'll be able to spend a lot more time telling these stories. With that, as I just said, today we're going to be talking about the case of Brittanee Drexel. It's definitely an older case that has finally come to a conclusion within the last year or so, and it's a case that I have actually been following for quite some time now. Grab yourself a little coffee or a snack, because this is going to be a long one. Brittanee Drexel was born in Rochester, New York on October 7th of 1991 to her father John and mother Dawn, who were teen parents at the time. Not long after Brittanee was born, John would end up moving to Tampa, Florida, leaving the two behind, and Dawn would eventually go on to marry a man named Chad Drexel, who would adopt Brittanee. Now, little Brittanee was actually born with something called persistent hyperplastic primary vitreous, and this was in her right eye, which ended up requiring her to have surgery, and she'd eventually have to go on to wear contact lenses because it would help the eye from wandering, because as far as I've seen, she ended up being blind in that eye. Chad and Dawn would then go on to have 2 more children, a daughter named Marissa and a son named Camden, to complete their little family. Growing up, Brittanee ended up being very into sports. She played soccer, and after her disappearance, her coach actually went on the news to speak about her.
Just before we get too sappy, I just want to tell a funny story about Brittanee, if I could. When coaching against Brittanee, I still remember the time and the day.
This is tough.
Yeah.
It's hard.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah, but we were playing up at Fairbanks Road, and Brittanee, the coaches were playing. It was a practice, and Brittanee, go ahead, Nick. Yeah, and absolutely. And just to finish that story, we're practicing, the soccer teams, and the coaches were on the field playing, and so I was on there, and Brittanee, was coming at me, and there was a ball coming, and I went and I got it from Brittanee, and she was maybe 15 years old, and I was the coach, and Brittanee, with that spunky sense of humor, looked at me and goes, "You better watch it, Baldy." And it's just something that I can still remember to this day.
And as you can see by the photos of Brittanee, she was definitely your very typical early 2000s teen. She loved going to party with her friends, and she seemed to really know who she was. She was just one of those people. And her dream after she graduated was to be a nurse or cosmetologist. And she was actually really great at helping her friends styling their hair. Her friend Tara Friedman sang, and I quote, "It was a great friendship from the very beginning. Everyone loved her when they met her immediately. She could get along with anyone, and that's how our friendship began to grow," end quote. It wouldn't be until years later that Brittanee would end up reuniting with her birth father. And this was around the time she was 16 years old. And according to John, him and his daughter clicked within like 5 minutes, despite not really knowing anything about each other. He said, and I quote, "She looked like me, her attitude, her looks, I was in awe. There was no words for it. I was just very happy," end quote. Now, John would end up flying up to visit his daughter, and the two would go to movies, they'd go shopping, and they would just spend a lot of time getting to know each other again, which is really sad to know that just about a year after John ended up reconnecting with his daughter, she would go missing. And I think that's really a sign to hug your loved ones closer. If there's someone you haven't sent a message to in a long time, just send the message, reconnect, say hi again, because you never know when it'll be the last time that you'll see someone. You'll never know if that chance will slip away and you won't be able to do it. In April of 2009, Brittanee was now 17 years old. And this was a time in her life that she was actually dealing with quite a bit, including Dawn and Chad getting a divorce, and they ended up eventually selling the family home, which led to a lot of depression and anxiety within Brittanee. There was a lot going on in her life. Her parents were breaking up. She was being uprooted from her childhood home, from her life. And it also seemed like she was having some relationship issues with her boyfriend, John Greco. At this time, she was arguing with John, she was skipping school, she was sleeping all the time, and her bad behavior began to concern her family. And her behavior was particularly concerning because just a few months earlier, Brittanee and John had actually gotten into a really big fight. They had one of their major breakups, and Brittanee ended up overdosing on some of her mother's pain medication. Her and John seem to be quite off and on, but at the same time, they seem to be very in love. They just seem to be like one of those couples that was constantly arguing and breaking up and getting back together. But I think it's important to talk about all of this because this is the headspace that Brittanee was in at that point in time. But I do think it is important that it was said that she was trying to get help for her mental health as well. But as spring break was coming up, Brittanee got this idea in her head that she wanted to go to Myrtle Beach, South Carolina to party for spring break and blow off some steam. However, when she asked her mother if she could go with some friends, her mother very sternly said no. Dawn did not feel comfortable, and rightfully so, with her underage daughter going with, older teens down to a whole different state where there was going to be no adult supervision other than like 18, 19-year-olds. On top of that, Myrtle Beach is known to not be that safe of a place. It's a little bit seedy in ways. It's definitely not a place for an underage 17-year-old girl to go. It's not like she could go down there and drink. She'd really just be going down then to sit on the beach or, get alcohol illegally from someone else. So it just really didn't seem like a good idea. And when you really consider the headspace that she was in, would going and partying and drinking make her mental health better? Probably not. But for several days after, Brittanee and her mother argued over this trip until Wednesday, April 22nd of 2009 rolled around. This day, Brittanee asked her mother if she could go over to a friend's house to have a sleepover so that the two of them could, get some space from each other because they've been arguing so much. And it was spring break, so at least she'd be, doing something for spring break. She could go hang out with a friend. They could go around Rochester and do some things together. And Dawn agreed to this, She didn't want to punish Brittanee. It wasn't a punishment to tell her no, she couldn't go. She just didn't feel comfortable with it. And again, rightfully so, especially when we end up talking about what would happen to Brittanee. Sometimes when you're younger, you don't think about consequences of things like that. You just think, I'm going to go have fun. Nothing's going to go wrong, but things can go wrong. So Dawn agreed for Brittanee to go have a sleepover with her friend that week. However, unbeknownst to Dawn, Brittanee was not going over to this friend's house, but was instead going to South Carolina with around 9 other people who were all over the age of 18. Now, her boyfriend John ended up not going. He had work, he had other obligations, so he couldn't go with her. And he was quoted saying, and I quote, "I knew she was going. It was only for 3 days, so I wasn't concerned. I never thought anything could happen in 3 days." End quote. That Wednesday, Brittanee, along with her friends Jennifer Ober and Alana Lippa, made the 13-hour drive to Myrtle Beach, arriving the following day on April 23rd. The group would end up checking into the Bar Harbor Hotel located at 100 South Ocean Boulevard. And that night, the group, along with a few other friends, ended up going over to Club Kryptonite, a local nightclub between the US 17 bypass and 29th Avenue North. And while they were at this nightclub, they actually ended up running into another group of people from Rochester, New York that they knew, including 20-year-old nightclub promoter Peter Brazowitz, who Brittanee had actually known for about 5 years. And that night, Brittanee would be spotted hanging out with Peter in the VIP section. The next day, on April 24th, Brittanee would be at the beach near the Blue Water Resort, which was another hotel on Ocean Boulevard. Now, at some point when Brittanee was on this beach, some kids began harassing her, and so she asked this random guy that was walking by if he could walk her to her hotel room because she wasn't feeling safe, I guess. Now, when they went back to the hotel room, this guy began to film her, which in my opinion is very strange. It's very odd. So I'm gonna play those clips now for you, but keep in mind, this was just before 11 p.m. at night.
Hey, Brett.
What?
As you can see in that video of Brittanee in the hotel room, she was on her phone constantly texting. As I said, she was a very typical early 2000s, mid 2000s teen, and she was glued to her phone. She was never not texting. So we're gonna talk a bit about her text messages that night. Just after that video was taken, Brittanee would end up going back onto the strip. One of her friends ended up texting her at 12:08 a.m., which was now April 25th, asking, "Everyone is wondering where you are." Brittanee responds at 12:11 a.m. saying, "I'm on the slingshot, lol, I'm chillin'." The friend asks at 12:18 a.m., "Who you with? You by yourself?" She responds a minute later with, "I'm with some friends from Rochester I know." At 12:35 a.m., Brittanee ends up texting her boyfriend John, asking him, "What are you doing?" He responds a minute later saying, "I'm in bed, baby. What are you doing?" She responds a minute after that saying, "I'm on the strip walking, talking with some friends I saw from school, baby." John asks at 12:38 a.m., "Are you with your friends or alone?" Brittanee responds at 12:41 a.m. saying, "I'm with Britt and her cousin and people from Gates. Everyone else is back at the hotel room drinking and everything, and I don't want to drink. So we're walking by all the shops and everything, just got ice cream." John asks at 12:42 a.m., "Oh, are you drinking?" Brittanee says a minute later, "No, baby, not at all. I haven't had one sip of anything." John asks at the same timestamp, "Okay, when are you going back to your hotel?" At 12:46 a.m., Brittanee says, "Soon, baby, I will call you. Just wanted to check up on you." John says at the same timestamp, "Okay, call me when you're in for the night." Brittanee responds a minute later saying, "I will, baby. I love you so, so much and I miss you." John responds a minute later, "I love you and miss you too. Be safe. I'm going to be dreaming of you till you call." So as I said earlier, they seem to be one of those couples that was very hot and cold, off and on. And at this point they were on. John knew exactly where Brittanee was. Her mother did not, unfortunately. And he was keeping in constant contact with her. They texted each other back and forth for the entire time she was there. And as you can see, she seems to be very open with John about what she's doing, what's going on. She states that she's not drinking. She, is just wandering around. She's going and getting ice cream. Keep in mind, she's 17 years old, and Brittanee wasn't really like a bad kid, despite her lying and sneaking down to South Carolina with some other friends and not telling her parents. She wasn't really a bad kid from all accounts. So it wasn't like she was going clubbing every night, getting wasted, doing drugs. She was kind of just along for the ride, just wanting to have some fun, it seems like. Later that day, Brittanee was once again at the beach again, but this time she was again with Peter Brazowitz and some of his friends. It was Saturday and the beach was packed for spring break. Brittanee ended up calling her mother later that day around 2 p.m. and she would actually tell her that she was at the beach. Now, as far as Dawn knew, her daughter was in Rochester, and the beach would actually be something that they'd call this area along the Lake Ontario shoreline of Rochester. So that's where she thought her daughter was, at, the beach. Brittanee told her mother that after the beach, they were going to go watch some movies, and she ended it off telling her mother that she loved her and she'd see her tomorrow. However, this was the last time that Dawn would ever speak to her daughter again, who she thought was safe in Rochester, New York, not too far away from her home. Later that evening, Brittanee left the Bar Harbor Hotel and began walking down Ocean Avenue towards the Blue Water Resort where Peter Brazowitz was staying. And she was heading over to Peter's hotel because she was going to get her flip-flops back that she left in his car. At 8:15 p.m., Brittanee would be caught on a traffic camera walking down the sidewalk while she texted. She'd also be captured on the security camera in the lobby of the Blue Water Resort at 8:35 p.m. According to Peter, Brittanee was only in his hotel room for around 10 minutes. And during this 10 minutes, Brittanee actually received a phone call from her friend Jennifer, who was back at their hotel room getting ready to go out. It would turn out that Brittanee was actually wearing a pair of Jennifer's shorts that she wanted to wear that night. Was pretty upset about it because she wanted those shorts back. According to Peter, the two girls argued on the phone about the shorts, and then Brittanee ended up leaving to go back to her hotel to return the shorts. Brittanee would be captured leaving the Blue Water Resort at 8:48 p.m., which checks out with that 10-minute time frame that she was there. As Brittanee was walking the 1.5 miles back to her hotel, she was texting John again, telling him how she was upset, she wasn't having fun, she was angry with her friends, and she missed him, and she couldn't wait to see him tomorrow. And at this point, her plan pretty much seemed to be that she was going to go back to that hotel, pack up her things, and go to sleep so that she could just get up in the morning and go back home, because she wasn't having fun at this point. Keep in mind, this was the last night they were going to be in Myrtle Beach. The friends were just partying and drinking and doing all this stuff, and she wasn't really being involved with that, and they were going to be leaving the next day. So it seemed like this was the night everyone wanted to party the hardest. But Brittanee didn't want to. She just wanted to go to sleep, get up, and go back home and see her boyfriend. Now, it was only supposed to take Brittanee about half an hour to walk back to her hotel, but half an hour would come and go, and Brittanee wouldn't return. The traffic camera that had caught her leaving by her hotel never caught her walking back to it. The cameras at her hotel never caught her returning either. And at 9:15 p.m., Brittanee's text to John would completely stop. And half an hour later, John was beginning to worry because, as you've seen, they were texting each other back like lightning. It was never stopping. It was constant texting. Brittanee was always glued to her phone. And at this point, John was starting to feel in his gut like something was wrong. An hour later, when Brittanee was still not responding, John tried to call her, but got no answer. So he ended up texting her saying that if she didn't get back to him, he was going to tell her mom where she was. And still, even though he threatened to tell her mom, Brittanee still didn't respond. So at this point, John was worried enough, and he ended up calling Dawn and telling her the situation. Which, hats off to John, because we see these situations happen so often with teenage kids where they get scared and they don't say anything. But in this instance, it was so good that John ended up speaking up. And in a different situation, this could save someone. So now Dawn knows. Dawn knows that her daughter is no longer in Rochester. She went to Myrtle Beach even though she was not supposed to. So Dawn immediately tried calling and texting Brittanee, but she didn't get a response from her either. Police would later determine that at 9:27 p.m., Brittanee's phone would ping off a tower at Surfside Beach, which was about 7 miles south of the Blue Water Resort, which is weird because Brittanee would have had to have walked north to go back to her hotel. not south. And it would have been impossible for Brittanee to have walked the 2.5-hour walk it would have been for her to get to Surfside Beach in that time frame, which means she must have been in a vehicle. At 11:58 p.m., Brittanee's phone would once again ping, but even farther south, in an area of South Carolina called McClellanville, which is a rural area 50 miles south between Charleston and Myrtle Beach. This would also be the last time that Brittanee's phone would ever ping again. Meanwhile, back in Rochester, Dawn is freaking out. She's obviously extremely far away. She can't just hop in her car and start searching for her daughter. So she had this idea to call a family friend named John Hain, who lived in North Carolina, so it wasn't as far. And she asked this family friend, John Hain, if he could drive down to Myrtle Beach and start looking for Brittanee and report her missing to the police. Meanwhile, Dawn is trying to get in contact with all of these friends that Brittanee had gone to Myrtle Beach with, but no one was answering her calls, which honestly must have been so frustrating. So after all of this, no one's responding, no one's answering. Dawn's in this panic. She can't get down there. She decided that she was going to leave in the morning to drive down to search for her daughter. Meanwhile, during the night, Brittanee's friends back in Myrtle Beach weren't that concerned about her whereabouts, but they did start worrying around 2 a.m. when she didn't return back to the hotel and she wasn't in contact with anyone, which in my opinion is a little odd because Jennifer should have been waiting for her to come back to give her shorts, but maybe she just thought she was not going to bring him back because they were arguing on the phone about it. I don't know. This entire situation with the friends to me is just really weird. Around 4 a.m., John Hain would arrive in Myrtle Beach and would report Brittanee missing to the police. Police would end up arriving at the Bar Harbor Hotel to question Brittanee's friends. However, in a really strange turn of events, they'd actually relocated to a different hotel called the Boardwalk Beach Resort, which is really weird considering that they were going to be leaving the next morning. However, police were able to eventually gain access to the original hotel room, and inside they would end up locating Brittanee's belongings. They also attempted to contact Peter, but they would also find out that Peter and his friends had suddenly decided to check out of their hotel just hours after Brittanee had gone missing, and were already on their way driving back to Rochester at that point. And it was really weird because all of Brittanee's quote-unquote friends seemed to be very uncooperative and had immediately left South Carolina as soon as Brittanee went missing. Which you'd think if your friend had gone missing, you would stay and help search, but not them. And this actually set off a lot of red flags and speculation and concern within the community and Brittanee's family and friends, like her actual friends. Especially since Peter and his friends were technically the last people to see Brittanee alive. Their actions looked super weird, rumors swirled, suspicion mounted. Dawn would eventually say, and I quote, "Brittanee had known Peter for 5 years and he displayed no empathy or concern for my missing daughter. My daughter made mistakes and one of those largest ones she ever made was trusting this group of people with her life." End quote. Dawn even confronted Peter on the Dr. Phil show. He was on the Dr. Phil show with his lawyer because of all these speculations and all of these rumors swirling around about these friends that Brittanee had gone with there and was hanging out with, and how they, just seemed up and left and didn't really seem to care that Brittanee was missing. And a big thing that Dawn was upset with was that Peter hadn't walked Brittanee back to her hotel room, even though she was only 17 years old and the strip was pretty seedy and it was, late at night. It was dark out. And I think Peter even said that he wouldn't walk around in that area alone. He only would walk around with friends. So it was like, why didn't you volunteer to drive her back? Because you had a car. But I'm pretty sure he basically just said like he wasn't her babysitter, which it's not wrong, but you should help friends out. And in my opinion, I just don't think these were really good friends. I think they were there to get drunk and party, and Brittanee should not have been there. She just shouldn't have been. But when you're a teenager, you make decisions and don't think about certain consequences and who you're hanging out with. Peter also said during this interview on the Dr. Phil show that it wasn't his decision to leave the hotel so suddenly and drive back, so I'm guessing it was one of the friends that wanted to leave that early in the morning. There was just a lot of drama, like so much drama researching this case. The search for Brittanee Drexel would begin on April 26th of 2009. Volunteers would hand out flyers and bars would be canvassed in the area. Law enforcement and volunteer searchers spent a lot of time looking in the South Santee River area, which was where Brittanee's cell phone had last pinged, as well as along the highway that her phone had traveled along.
The search for a missing 17-year-old spring breaker intensified in Georgetown County today. More than 50 men and women combed the area around North Santee River. News Channel 15's Graham Moore just got back from there. And Graham, I guess the first question is, why are they searching that particular area?
Well, because that's the last place the girl's cell phone gave a signal from. It was active Saturday night when she went missing into early Sunday morning, beaming a signal to a cell tower there in southern Georgetown County. But since then, there has been no activity from the girl's cell phones.
They checked traffic cameras, security cameras. They brought out everything and anything you can think of. They brought out boats, four-wheelers, search dogs, just anything they could use to try to find Brittanee, and they could not find a single thing. It was as if Brittanee had vanished into thin air. All they had were those cell phone pings, and at this point, they didn't even know if Brittanee was with her cell phone when it was traveling along this area. I mean, whatever happened to her, the person could have taken her somewhere else or dumped her somewhere else and then taken her phone another way. Police literally seem to have nothing. So what happened to Brittanee? So the initial theory was that Brittanee had possibly ran away because she was having so many issues back in Rochester. Her mental health wasn't the greatest, and now she went on this vacation to relax, but now she's fighting with her friends. So it was one of those things like, maybe she just had enough and she just decided, like, I'm not happy there. I'm not even happy here. Like, I just want to be somewhere else. And she left. There was also talk about her possibly unaliving herself due to the previous times she had taken her mother's pills and OD'd. But her boyfriend, John, seemed to have a belief that Brittanee was somewhere out there, that she was still out there somewhere.
I foresee Brittanee coming home. I do not foresee this becoming a negative ending.
A mystery that search crews are trying to solve by pulling all stops from canvassing dirt trails to riding on horses through the heavily wooded area of Georgetown County.
We are pretty much putting all the effort that we can into scanning just all the acres around here and trying to get a hold, or trying to get anything that could lead to where she could possibly be right now.
A hope that is the only thing Brittanee's grandparents say they are hanging on to. They say they will keep looking for the granddaughter they helped raise for over 17 years.
I'm not going home. Me and my wife are staying here till I know something. I don't care how long it takes.
Had so much help here that I just can't even think of the words.
And hats off to him. John was an amazing boyfriend in all of this. He seemed to stand by her. Again, he immediately told her mother when he couldn't get in contact with her. He just really seemed to be there for her, and he wanted to find her. It was really sweet to see. Brittanee's father, John, also believed that Brittanee had possibly run away because he said one time when they were chatting, she had made up this scenario asking him what he would do if she ended up running off with, a rich man or something. Unsurprisingly, another really big theory at this time was that one of the friends that were at Myrtle Beach with Brittanee had something to do with her disappearance. She was having issues with them. She wanted to go home, and last anyone knew, she was heading back to her hotel to give back those shorts to, a friend who was upset with her. Then Brittanee goes missing, and these friends aren't being cooperative at all. The online community went absolutely bonkers with accusations against the friends. There were theories that these friends lured Brittanee back to the hotel room so she could be kidnapped and put into human trafficking, or that it was like a prank gone wrong and they ended up hiding her body because they had accidentally killed her. It just felt like someone knew something, but no one was talking. And I would agree. Just the whole vibe from these friends and the situation, it was just so weird. But days, weeks, months would pass and Brittanee would not be found.
As far as any new evidence, they're no closer to finding Brittanee Drexel tonight. Earlier this week, investigators traced Drexel's cell signal to Georgetown County. That's the last sign of Brittanee investigators have had.
The spring breaker who vanished from Myrtle Beach turns 18 today. 6 months have passed since she was last seen, but the search efforts for her are ramping up.
We do have hope that she's still out there. So, I mean, you still always have hope, but in the back of your mind, you have to think the worst.
December of 2009, a couple from Charleston County named Francie and Robert Varn were camping in the area where Brittanee's cell phone had last pinged. They would end up coming across a pair of knockoff Prada glasses in a wooded section of the riverbank along the North Santee River in Georgetown County.
Spring breaker Brittanee Drexel turned up a possible piece of evidence in her disappearance. This pair of knockoff Prada sunglasses was found in some woods along the banks of the North Santee River in Georgetown County. Police cannot say for sure whether they belong to Drexel, but they do fit a description of Drexel's sunglasses. They will be sent for DNA testing. We spoke with the woman who found those glasses while camping along the river and had heard about the search, so she called police.
They wouldn't be like something that a hunter or anyone would wear. And just that they were in a funny place where they wouldn't have washed up, that they, had to have been dropped there.
However, it would never be confirmed nor denied if these sunglasses were in fact the same glasses. A second search would be conducted in the area. Again, nothing came of this search.
Once again, looking for new clues in the search for Brittanee Drexel tonight. A weekend search comes up empty. Good evening. It has been nearly 8 months now since Brittanee Drexel disappeared during spring break in Myrtle Beach.
And over the weekend, the search became hopeful. Acting on a tip, police divers searched a waterway south of Myrtle Beach. Brittaney's mom, Dawn, traveled to that site, but hopes were dashed. New at 11, Dawn Drexel is back home, and with Raymond Moody tonight, spoke about facing Christmas without Brittanee.
Yeah, Jenny, Christmas Day will actually mark the 8th anniversary of Brittanee's disappearance, and her family says they will include her in their Christmas plans.
We have put her tree up and some decorations outside the house, but it's going to be very difficult.
And though there are no solid leads in Brittanee's case, the family holds on to hope that she'll be home in time to unwrap presents on Christmas morning.
Last year I got her a rose that it says I love you always. And then I think this year I'm going to get her maybe a necklace that says sister. I don't know how, but I just have like a crazy feeling that she's going to be home.
At the 1-year mark of Brittanee's disappearance, authorities would announce that they were making progress, they had several persons of interest, and they also had a location that they were interested in. And in July of 2010, things would take a turn. 37-year-old Timothy Sean Taylor of McClellanville would turn himself into the Myrtle Beach Police Department for attempted kidnapping. This was after 20-year-old Rhonda Massey from Tennessee was outside the Blue Water Resort when she says a van pulled up behind her and 2 men attempted to grab her. She says she ended up getting away after she elbowed one of the men in the face.
Before I could turn around, one male had me around the waist and one by the arm and trying to pull me into his van.
Her dad calls her brave. Some would simply call her lucky. Just days after Rhonda Massey says 3 men in a van tried to abduct her here along Ocean Boulevard, she takes us to the area she says it all happened.
Well, it happened so fast. Like, there was no time to really scream. Like, I'm surprised I reacted in time, to be honest. It was just so fast.
She got away, but not without a fight. Rhonda says if she hadn't fought back, things would have turned out differently.
It's hard to imagine what would have happened. They would have hurt. I imagine they would have hurt me. They could have been raped. And I don't think they would have ever found me.
Police would end up saying that a phono lineup led them to Timothy Sean Taylor. According to the Drexel family, and I quote, "The 911 calls of the day my daughter disappeared were of the same nature. Light-colored van. Timothy was in the light-colored van. Timothy lives in the area about a mile away from Brittanee's last known cell phone activity, a mile away." End quote. Which in my opinion are some very strange similarities. That this man turns himself in for an attempted kidnapping, where this girl has a van pulled up behind her and these men try to grab her. And this happened in the same area around where Brittanee went missing. There were reports of similar vans in the area. You know, this guy lives near where her cell phone pinged. It's just really weird. However, the following November, charges against Timothy Sean Taylor were actually dropped because his alibi proved that he was about 40 miles away when this attempted kidnapping took place. So he was never charged in Rhonda's attempted kidnapping. But this family does have an even more sordid history with the law. Timothy Sean Taylor's brother, Randall Keith Taylor, was actually arrested and charged, along with 4 other men, for the kidnapping and murder of 19-year-old Shannon McConney. However, just like his brother's case, according to court records, prosecutors later dropped the charges against all 5 men because of insufficient evidence. Now, in this case, it was insufficient evidence, not an alibi. So could he still have been involved? I think possibly, but unfortunately Shannon's abduction and murder has still not been solved to this day. To add to this, in 2011, Timothy Sean Taylor's son, Timothy DeSean Taylor, who was actually 18 years old at the time, would face charges after being a getaway driver after 2 people he was with held up a McDonald's and shot the manager at the McDonald's. So keep all that in mind and we'll get back to this family in a moment. In August of 2011, authorities would end up searching room 22 at the Sunset Lodge in Georgetown, South Carolina. And this was, in fact, in connection to Brittanee Drexel's disappearance. It said that crime scene investigators took at least 1 cardboard box and several paper bags into the apartment. They sprayed substances on the sink, fridge, curtains, and took portions of the wallpaper as well as the mattress as evidence. And this room would turn out to have belonged to a man named Raymond Moody. And according to the motel manager, Raymond Moody had checked into the hotel the day before Brittanee Drexel had gone missing. Raymond also received a speeding ticket the day after Brittanee went missing, and he checked out of that motel about 6 months later. And it would turn out that Raymond Moody was a registered sex offender. Now, that speeding ticket, interestingly enough, had been given to him in the area of Surfside, which was one of the areas that Brittanee's cell phone had pinged. Now let's talk about Raymond Moody for a moment, because this guy is the worst of the worst. In 1983, Raymond Moody would be sentenced to 40 years in a California prison after he kidnapped and SA'd an 8-year-old girl. He was also suspected to be involved with other crimes involving children ranging from ages of 5 to 17 years old, which is just disgusting. On a morning in 1983, 8-year-old Carrie Harding spoke to her friend on the phone and arranged to meet at their school to play on the playground together. Her school was just a few yards down the street from her home in Vallejo, California. As Carrie began walking through the parking lot of the school, a man who Carrie would later identify as Raymond Moody approached her and warned, and I quote, "You can't go back there because they're working on a fence," end quote. Now, Carrie was taught not to talk to strangers, so she ignored this man and continued going past him as he bounced a basketball next to his car. It would turn out that there actually was a man working on that fence, so Carrie turned back around to walk towards the street. And just as she passed Raymond, he grabbed her from behind, pulling her by her hair and putting a hand over her mouth so she couldn't scream. He then pulled her by her waist into the passenger seat of his car. Carrie would later say, and I quote, "Everything happened in the blink of an eye. He had me in the car and was driving away within seconds," end quote. She would end up asking Raymond where he was taking her, and he said, and I quote, "You're too little to be out here by yourself. I'm taking you to the police station," end quote. So he was not taking Carrie anywhere safe. Instead, Raymond drove Carrie to an undeveloped housing site about 3 miles away and parked the car. Raymond then said, and I quote, "Has anyone ever told you that you have a beautiful body? Let's get in the back. We're going to screw," end quote. And 8-year-old Carrie didn't even know what that meant. She didn't know what screwing was. But Raymond would end up forcing Carrie into the back seat, forcing her to undress, and he would begin to brutally SA her for hours. Hours. Carrie saying, and I quote, "I for sure thought he was going to kill me," end quote. Eventually, Raymond agreed to let Carrie use the bathroom, which consisted of them opening up the back door of the car, the back seat, and her squatting next to the car as he kept a grip on her hair. According to Carrie, when she squatted down to use the bathroom, a pool of blood began to pour out of her and began to get bigger and bigger on the ground below her, which I can't even imagine the trauma that this man caused this little 8-year-old girl, especially for that to happen. Just horrific. However, this seemed to end up saving Carrie because when Raymond ended up noticing the large amount of blood, he ended up letting Carrie's hair go for a moment and she took this opportunity to run. Now you hear all of that, what this disgusting man did to this child. In 2005, Raymond Moody would end up being released from prison after only serving 21 years. And he was classified as a level 3 sex offender. Now, what is that, you ask? According to the California 3-tier registration system, a tier 3 encompasses allegedly more serious sex offenses, and you are not eligible to petition the court to be removed from the sex offender registry. Yet this man, after doing all of that and probably more that we don't know of, only had to serve about half his sentence. Disgusting. Just absolutely awful that this man was let out after he did this to this child and was just allowed to do it again to whoever he wanted, it seemed like. This is definitely a case that will piss you off because it just makes you question the legal system and how everything works. How this man was ever allowed to get out, let alone after only serving half his sentence, is beyond me. So Raymond would end up being put on parole and he would end up returning back to his hometown of Georgetown, South Carolina. 2 years later, Raymond was no longer on parole, but he took his freedom very seriously, as you will hear, because by the very next year, he would be charged with indecent exposure, which would then be released to public disorderly conduct. Then in 2009, Raymond would also be charged for failing to register as a sex offender. And his only punishment was being ordered to pay a $250 fine. A level 3 sex offender, which we just read, is not allowed to even petition to get themselves removed because they are that dangerous. Was just allowed to go back to his hometown and not register, and the only punishment he had was getting charged money. Absolutely wild. It's ridiculous, and it's even more ridiculous to know that just 2 months after that, Brittanee Drexel would disappear. In August of 2011, Raymond Moody would be announced as a person of interest, and this is what he had to say when he was interviewed.
Thing about the missing teenager?
No, I do not.
Can you tell us where you were back in April of '09?
Goodbye.
Ray, can we talk to you for a minute, real quick?
You know what? I'm going to call the police in a second. You better split.
Can you just tell us where you were in April of '09?
I got nothing to say to you. You understand that?
Just a standout guy all around. In December of 2013, remains would end up being found in Horry County, approximately 6 miles from where Brittanee Drexel was last seen. These remains would end up being skeletal, and they were found by someone walking in the area of Tidewater Road near Waccamaw. However, these remains would turn out to not be Brittanee's. In 2016, things would once again take a very big turn, and this was also around the time when law enforcement announced that they didn't believe that Brittanee was going to be found alive at this time. This is when the family, I think it really hit them that Brittanee was most likely not going to be found alive. She was most likely dead.
Come to discover through the course of the investigation now is that Brittanee Drexel did leave the Myrtle Beach area. We believe she traveled
to this area around McClellanville and the North Charleston, South Georgetown area, and we believe she was killed after that. We're here today seeking the help from the public, from you, the media, and helping us get the word out about that.
After 7 long years of waiting and praying for the return of my daughter, we know she isn't coming home alive. Brittanee's life was stolen from her in a brutal and senseless fashion. I need your help in bringing the people responsible for her death to justice.
And that's because on August 15th of that year, the FBI would testify in court that a jailhouse informant had given them information regarding Brittanee's essay and murder. This informant, who was named Taquan Brown, told police that he had witnessed Timothy Deshaun Taylor, who we talked about earlier. He had told law enforcement that he had seen a then 16-year-old Timothy taking turns essaying Brittanee with about 8 to 12 other men. And he said this all happened at a stash house in the McClellanville area. He then told them that another time he went over to the stash house, Brittanee had attempted to escape and he had heard 2 gunshots. And according to Taquan Brown, he believed that the person that pulled the trigger was actually Timothy Deshaun Taylor's father, Timothy Sean Taylor. He then claimed that after Brittanee was killed, they took her body, wrapped it up, and threw it in an alligator pit in a nearby swamp. Now, according to this FBI agent's testimony, another jailhouse informant also told them that Timothy Deshaun Taylor allegedly picked up Brittanee from Myrtle Beach and brought her back to McClellanville to show her off and introduce her to some friends that were there. It's claimed that, and I quote, they ended up tricking her out with some of their friends, offering her to them and getting a human trafficking situation going on, end quote. Now, all of that sounds pretty believable. You have multiple different jailhouse informants saying this. You know, this family has a lot of strange situations that they've been involved in, although, you know, the younger Taylor is the only one that's really been charged with anything, and the only thing he was charged with was being an accessory, essentially, to a robbery. So it's not like it's anything to do with essay or kidnapping. It doesn't really mean much, but, you know, usually there's a history or pattern of some sort. Although his father and uncle do have a very sketchy history. Despite them not being charged, they've been involved and accused of some strange and very disturbing things. But the younger Taylor would end up fighting back, saying he was being falsely accused. He would later tell the media that he was only 16 years old at the time, he was only 100 pounds, and he actually only had 1 arm. He was quoted saying, and I quote, I had no involvement with anything to do with Brittanee Drexel. I don't even know Taquan Brown, and I don't know why he would call my name, end quote. But at this point in time, people were really thinking that, you know, this father, son, uncle group could have done something to Brittanee. So could they have abducted Brittanee against her will? Keep in mind everything I just said about the family. There's a lot of accusations flying with them. So was this story of Brittanee being picked up and taken to the stash house to be trafficked that far-fetched? I don't think it was at that time, especially since there seemed to be no other information coming out. There were no other leads. March of 2017, authorities would begin searching a wooded area along a dirt road in Georgetown, South Carolina, called Foxfire Court.
April 25th, 2009, the disappearance of Brittanee Drexel has been an ongoing and active investigation even through today. This case was never closed, was never declared a cold case, but it has been investigated by numerous law enforcement agencies throughout the state of South Carolina. Same reasons we ended up last summer, you recall, in McClellanville. The investigation that didn't stop, these agents persevered. I want to discuss what we found or what we did not find, but I'm confident in telling you that the investigation was advanced. We have progressed, we've made strides in bringing those responsible for Brittanee's death and disappearance to justice.
And again, years would pass and no details would surface until May 4th of 2022, when 62-year-old Raymond Moody would be arrested for obstruction of justice and held without bond in the Georgetown County Detention Center. And he was then given a $100,000 bond. At this point, it had been nearly 10 years since he was announced as a person of interest. 8 days later, on May 12th, human remains would end up being discovered in a wooded area of Georgetown County. This area was only 2.5 miles from the motel that Raymond Moody had been living in when Brittanee Drexel disappeared. And by May 16th, authorities would eventually announce that those remains were in fact of 17-year-old Brittanee Drexel. During a press conference, authorities would announce the discovery and would also announce that Raymond Moody was now being charged with the kidnapping, essay, and murder of Brittanee Drexel. Now, according to warrants, Raymond had unlawfully seized and or confined Brittanee, committed non-consensual sexual battery against her in the commission of a kidnapping, and was done by using aggravating force. Authorities believed at this time that Brittanee had been essayed and murdered at the Santee River near where her sunglasses had been found, and that her body moved to Old Town Avenue where it was later found. Brittanee's parents, Chad and Dawn, would end up speaking at a press conference asking for privacy at this time.
Tonight, a tragic end to the 13-year-old search for an 18-year-old Brittanee Drexel in South Carolina. The Georgetown County Sheriff's Office announcing today that investigators say they found her remains late last week. Drexel was visiting Myrtle Beach from New York when she disappeared in April of 2009. They say that this man, Raymond Moody, raped, kidnapped, and strangled her, and then buried her the next day. This happened about 2.5 miles away from where Moody was living in 2009, and an area investigators had not searched yet. Drexel's mother talked today at a news conference.
Today marks the beginning of a new chapter. The search for Brittanee is now a pursuit of Brittanee's justice.
What actually happened to Brittanee? Well, it took authorities nearly 13 years to find her body and over 10 years to arrest Raymond Moody. And as I said earlier, the friends seemed really sketchy. This family that had all these weird accusations against them that were really crazy seemed sketchy. There were all these other people that seemed they could be involved. And then we end up with Raymond Moody, which when you hear about his past, it all makes sense. And the fact that they let this man out after only serving half his sentence, and now he's being charged with murdering another teen girl is just, it's infuriating. It means that this monster who violently essayed an 8-year-old girl was allowed to only serve half his sentence and then was released, didn't have to check in, didn't have to register as a sex offender, considering he was a tier 3, was just released into the public with no care. He then went and kidnapped, essayed, and murdered Brittanee. Again, let alone what else he may have done while he was just out free prowling the streets. It would turn out that advancements in technology had allowed law enforcement to pinpoint the exact moment when Brittanee had gone from a walking speed to 55 miles per hour. And this eventually would allow them to narrow down the surveillance footage to a very precise time and ended up capturing a vehicle that they thought Brittanee was in. And this vehicle would lead them to Raymond Moody and his girlfriend at the time, Angel Voss. In April of 2022, Angel ended up speaking with the FBI and she agreed to wear a wire, and this led to her capturing a conversation that led to the FBI getting a search warrant for Raymond Moody's home. Now, this search didn't turn up any evidence. However, it did lead to Raymond's confession, and Raymond's confession would end up leading police to her remains. Raymond Moody would eventually plead guilty to Brittanee's murder on October 19th of 2022, almost exactly a year ago as I'm recording this video. So let's talk about Raymond's version of events of what happened that night. According to Raymond, him and his girlfriend, Angel Voss, had driven up to Myrtle Beach to party when they ended up spotting Brittanee walking down the street, and they ended up asking her if she wanted to party and smoke some marijuana. And according to Raymond, Brittanee voluntarily got into his vehicle. He then said that the three of them ended up at a campsite that he had in Georgetown County, where they hung out, they smoked some marijuana, and he was hoping that she was going to get high enough where she'd want to sleep with him. At some point in the night, Angel ended up leaving this campsite to go tend to a family member nearby, and that is when Raymond ended up coming on to Brittanee. He said that Brittanee resisted his sexual advances, and this is when he seized her, forced her to remove her clothes, and forced her to have sex with him over threats of violence. Raymond said that after he essayed Brittanee, he realized what he had done and realized he was going to go to prison again, so this is when he decided to strangle her. He then wrapped her body in a blanket and moved her to the bushes nearby. When Angel ended up returning to the campsite, she asked where Brittanee had gone, and he said that some of Brittanee's friends had come and picked her up. Raymond said that after this, him and Angel left the campsite, but then he returned to it in the middle of the night. This is when he ended up moving Brittanee's body and burying her in the location where her body ended up being found. It's just awful, and I will say now that I don't believe most of his story. I do not believe that Brittanee got into his vehicle willing, although you would think that they would have Angel's version of events as well, because the FBI spoke to her and he claims that Angel was with him when they picked up Brittanee. I really wish I had more information on that. Let me know if you found anything about what Angel said or the corroboration of this story. Or if the FBI is just believing it to, get the charges done and close this case. The reason that I don't believe she got into his vehicle willing is because her texts immediately stopped when she got picked up. If she had gotten into his vehicle willingly and they drove to this campsite to just party and smoke marijuana, why wasn't she texting anyone? Why wasn't she texting John? Because she was texting him that entire time she was gone and in Myrtle Beach, telling him exactly what she was doing. So why wouldn't she say, you know, oh, I found this guy and I'm out smoking weed or whatever. On top of that, why would the 17-year-old girl get into a vehicle with this much older man? He was like was he in his 50s? And this guy's girlfriend to go smoke weed like hours away. It just doesn't make sense to me, especially considering she wasn't doing any drugs or drinking any alcohol as far as we know that weekend at all. Keep in mind, Brittanee was walking back to her hotel room so she could pack her bag and go to sleep. So if she was just walking back alone in the middle of the night and this strange man pulls up, why would she agree to get into his vehicle with him to go party and smoke weed? The only thing I can think is if he took her willingly, is if he offered to just give her a ride back to the hotel. And she got in, and he obviously didn't take her to the hotel. But I still don't see why she would agree to get into his vehicle. I just can't get behind her getting into his vehicle willingly, especially considering her cell phone and her text stopped immediately when that happened. In my opinion, I think Raymond Moody is just trying to minimize what he did. Yes, he did confess to doing this stuff to her. And in my opinion, I do think he kidnapped her. He did admit his intentions were to get her high so he could sleep with her. I just don't believe that it happened the way that he said. But that's just my opinion. Let me know what you think. But we will find out that there was evidence that Brittanee did fight for her life. About a month after Raymond was arrested, police would end up sitting down with a man named Ernest Merchant. Now, Ernest is actually Raymond's former romantic partner / cell husband from when he was back in prison in California. And according to Ernest, Raymond and him actually had a relationship outside of prison when they went back to Georgetown, South Carolina. And he says that at first Raymond was never cruel, he was never violent or unkind towards him. However, according to Ernest, this behavior changed immediately after Raymond was let off parole, which we also seen when he was charged about a year or so later with, what was it, indecent exposure, whatever it was. It was like as soon as he got off parole and he was home free to do whatever he wanted and he wasn't under constant supervision, he was flying off the walls and he was going back to his old ways, which again, in my opinion, this man should not have been let out at all. According to Ernest, Raymond's attitude was along the lines of, and I quote, "I've done 25 years of being under supervision and I'm free, I'm gonna do what I want," end quote. This is also around the time when Ernest would end up catching Raymond cheating with Angel and the two of them would end up breaking up. After the relationship ended, Ernest said there were a handful of times that Raymond really scared him, saying that he truly felt like he didn't know Raymond at all after this, and that Raymond had a look in his eyes that said, "I could kill you." Around the time of Brittanee's disappearance, Ernest said that he ended up seeing Raymond and that Raymond ended up having scratches on his face, and he described Raymond as acting frantic and not concise. He described the scratches on Raymond's body as claw marks on Raymond's face, neck, and bald head.
I asked him, I said, did you have anything to do with that girl's disappearance? No, I would never do anything like that. I would never do anything like that. And I guess I believed him. But that thing has never left me. I can't say it out loud. It makes me so sad. It makes me so sad for that poor family, for that poor girl. And I pictured it.
Yeah.
I had it going over and over in my head and realizing that he drove right past where I was sleeping.
So we do know that Brittanee fought for her life. So whatever ended up happening to her, it's just, either way, it's very tragic. And she didn't deserve what happened to her at all. She was just trying to have some fun. She was a teenage girl who made a wrong decision. She definitely shouldn't have gone, but this still shouldn't have happened to her. Raymond Moody would end up being sentenced to 30 years in prison, which hopefully he will serve all of this time, and would say in court, and I quote, "I served 20 years and I thought it was enough, but it wasn't. I was a monster. I was a monster then, and I was a monster when I took Brittanee Drexel's life. I don't have the words to express how horrible I feel. I'm very sorry," end quote. I don't believe this man feels any ounce of remorse, but that's just, again, my opinion. Brittanee's stepfather, Chad, would end up saying through tears, and I quote, 13 years later, I find out the horrible and disgusting way she was murdered, end quote. He would also go on to call Raymond a perverted, sick monster, which he is. During court, Dawn ended up wearing Brittaney's ashes in a necklace around her neck, saying, and I quote, "That's all we have left after what you did to her. You are a disgrace to your parents, your own children, your family, and any friends you have left. You are a serial rapist and a child predator, and you should be ashamed of your actions," end quote. Continuing by saying, and I quote, "I am so glad my daughter was feisty and fought back. She fought for her life. We now know she scratched the hell out of your face and your neck. You will forever carry the scars of what my daughter did to you, and I hope you were haunted by her," end quote. And I think one of the most tragic things about Brittaney's death is just how young she was and how much life she still had ahead of her. You know, at 17, you think you're grown. You think, you know, you can run off and go to a different state and go party with people. But Brittaney was only 17. She was still a kid, as much as an adult as I'm sure she felt. I mean, I felt the same way back then. I used to want to jump on a plane and go see my friends across in a different country even. And I started doing it at 18. I thank the forces out there that I'm still around, sitting here, being able to tell these stories to you all. I could have had a fate like Brittaney's. I will tell you, the amount of times I jumped on a Greyhound or a plane and went and hung out with people that I had never met before, ended up in situations that were so scary when you look back, to think that I definitely should not have made those choices. And I am thankfully am still here to talk to you all and to be able to live my life still. But this one choice that Brittaney made, she just wanted to go have some fun, and it ended differently. A friend of Brittaney's would end up saying, and I quote, "We planned on just going through all the milestones of life together. You really look forward to that, and you want to be able to grow up with your best friend. You want to keep that friendship for the rest of your life. And having that robbed from you is what really hurts," end quote. So that is the case of Brittanee Drexel. After all of these years, it's finally been solved. I remember following this case for the last decade or so as it's been playing out. I'm just very glad that they ended up finally being able to arrest and charge Raymond Moody and that he's back in prison. The fact that this man, again, was even let out, I'm sorry if I keep repeating myself, but I'm flabbergasted that they ever let him out early, let alone after he only served about half his sentence. Then it took them a whole other decade to arrest him. It's just, I can't imagine how many other victims he may have out there. I can't imagine. I don't think that this was just a one-time thing that he did. The level of severity of his crimes is just mind-blowing. I really do feel that there's probably other victims out there, unfortunately. But let me know how you all feel. I'm also very glad that Brittaney's family can finally get closure. It's been a long time, and I really do hope that they can heal after all of this time. It's just tragic all around. But what I do want to know is how you all feel about this case. Again, let me know if you enjoy this longer form of content, if you want me to do these longer videos, or if you want me to do more shorter videos or whatever. I really want to know how you all feel. When I do these longer videos, there's going to be less videos, like once a week or so. So let me know. With that, I hope you all stay safe out there. Make sure you lock your windows and doors. And if you're out somewhere where you're not familiar with the area, or even if you are, just stay vigilant. Definitely don't get into a vehicle with someone you don't know, and just stay safe out there. I'll see you in the next video.